Hi guys, it's Jennifer Steele with at EDU 610, Overview of Qualitative and Quantitative Research Strategies at American University. And in this video, I'm going to be showing you how to do Excel topic 8, which is correlations and scatter plots. So we're going to be working with data that you either saw in this week's lesson or a previous week's lesson from Marks 2008. So these are international data that examine the gender gap in reading and math scores by country. So every country, as you may recall in that article, had a gender gap in reading, a gender gap in math, and the authors looked at the extent to which that was related to other characteristics of the countries. So today we're going to be looking at, I'm sharing my screen with you. We're looking at the assignment here on the screen. And so the first thing you'll want to do is download the Excel data sheet. So in this data sheet, I've just taken the data from the from table 3 of the Marks article and just copied it into an Excel data sheet. And when we're finished, we're going to wind up with a scatter plot that looks like this graph right here called figure 1. But when you look at the raw data, when you first open the data, it's going to look like this. So, and by the way, if you are doing this from Canvas, you will click on the table 3 from Marks 2008, and you'll get data that looks like this with a raw tab in the bottom and a finished tab at right, and then you'll click here to download the data and save it with as your last name, topic 8 Excel. Once you've saved it, it's going to look, once you've saved it and opened it in Microsoft Excel, it's going to look essentially like what you see on my screen. So in column A, we have all of the countries in the data set. So there are 31 countries in the data set. Then we have the gender gap in reading, gender gap in math, and I think positive means it favors, the gap favors women, and negative means the gap favors males. So the gap is the average female score minus the average male score. So negative means that males are outperforming. Then we have the Gini coefficient for income, which is a measure of income inequality. The closer to 0, the greater the income inequality in a country. We have gross domestic product per capita in US dollars, share of employment, university educated percent, earnings ratio, and spending as a percent of gross domestic product, where obviously a higher spending country would have a higher ratio or a higher percent. Okay, so we have 31 lines of data. And so what we're going to do, following the instructions on the sheet, is the bottom row of data at present is row 32, which is the United States, because these are alphabetically sorted. So we're going to create row 33 to show the correlations of each of the other columns to the reading gap column. And let me just go back and remind myself. We go to the finished data. Oh, finished data are going to be reading gap versus math gap in the graph. Okay, so back to the raw data. So, so what we're going to do is we're going to create a line of correlations, which actually already existed in the article by Marks. There was already a row of correlations at the bottom, and you're going to be creating that row. So what you're doing is in row 33, you're going to show the correlation of every variable. So I'm just going to make this a little easier to see what we're doing, I'm going to click on A2, and I'm just going to go to View up here on the top menu, and I'm going to freeze pane. So I'm going to freeze, I could just freeze panes, but instead I'm going to freeze top row. And that means when I scroll down, I can still see what the variables are. Okay, so we're going to go to row 33, and we're going to create a, I'm just trying to see what we're going to label this. Let me go back to my finished one to see what we label it. Oh, we call it correlation with reading gap and correlation with math gap. That's what we're ultimately going to label it. But we're going to create in row 33 the correlation of all of the variables with the reading gap. So to do that, we're going to type, the formula is, the way the formula works is equals, because we're writing a formula, Correl, C-O-R-R-E-L, parentheses, array 1, comma, array 2. So in cell C33, we're going to type equals Correl $B $2, colon, $B $32, comma, C $2, C $32. So let me talk about what this does. First, I'm going to copy it, and I'm going to paste it in C33. Okay, so I've got a correlation of 0.7347. So what this is doing is it's giving me the correlation of B32, of the B rows with the B column with the C column. That's what it's actually doing. It's, so if I click up here, I can see these two columns highlighted, and I can see that B is blue and C is red. And so what I'm doing in cell C33 is the correlation of reading gaps with math gaps. And we would expect the correlations to be positive, I imagine, because we would expect that if women are outperforming in one country relative to another country, then if they're outperforming in reading in one country relative to another, they would also be outperforming in math relative to another country. So we would expect those correlations to be positive. And indeed, we find that the correlation is positive, 0.7347. So it's about a 73% correlation, which is greater than 50%, and correlations, of course, max out at 1. And so it's a positive correlation, means it's greater than 0, and it's fairly close to 1, so it's a fairly strong correlation. That's the correlation between reading and math. But then we're going to click this little green square following the instructions. We're going to drag the cell C33 formula to the left to B33 to get the correlation of reading gap with itself. And we're going to use the green square at the bottom. Also in step 3, we're going to use the green square at the bottom of C33 to drag the formula to all of the other columns as well. So we click the 73% correlation. We grab the little square at the bottom of the green rectangle that's highlighting the square, and we just drag it to the right to all the columns. So now we see that the math gap, a country's gender gap in math is negatively correlated with its Gini coefficient, meaning that a higher Gini coefficient, a higher inequality in income is associated with lower gender gaps in math. There's virtually no correlation with gross domestic product per capita or national wealth. There's a positive correlation of 0.38 with share of unemployment, positive correlation with percent university educated, although it's small. An earnings ratio, very small positive correlation with earnings ratio of about 0.1 roughly, and a correlation of about 0.4 with spending as a percent of gross domestic product. So that's what we get when we drag those, when we drag the formula to the right. We're also going to go back to that original cell and just drag it one cell to the left. This is step 4 in the assignment sheet. We're just dragging it to the left to show that the correlation of the gender gap in reading with itself is, it's a 1-to-1 correlation, and any figure is perfectly correlated with itself. So gender gaps in reading have a correlation of 1 with themselves. And I misspoke a minute ago when I said that these other correlations were with the gender gap in math. These are correlations with the gender gap in reading, because everything is, the source data is column B2. And as we drag to the right, the second array adjusts as we drag the formula to the right. So if I click in E, it's correlating the B the B column with the E column. If I click in F, it's correlating the B column with the F column. If I click in G, B column with G column, and so forth. And that's because we did not put a $sign before the G. We did not lock the column on the second array, but we did use a $sign to lock the column on the first array, and that's why the first array B2 to B32 stays the same even as we drag the formula. Okay. Oops. Okay. If you make a mistake in Excel, you just do Control Z, which undoes the mistake, of course. Okay. So it's undo. You can also use this little undo curly arrow to the left to undo any mistakes as well. Okay, so we're going to call this correlation with reading gap. Reading gap has a 1-to-1 correlation with itself, as we already said. Then in the next row, we're going to do correlation math gap. And for that, so this is step 5. We're creating row 34 in the Excel sheet. We're going to drag the formula in B33 down to B34. And then we're going to amend the formula so that it reads C2 through C32. And then we're going to do the correlations. So then we'll click and drag. So first let's go to B2 first. We'll drag that cell downward. And of course we have the same thing because we just duplicated the formula. So now we're going to, in row 34 though, we're going to adjust the formula. We no longer want the source data to be B, we want the source data to be C. We want everything correlated with math gap, which lives in C. So now we have the same thing in B34 that we have in C33, which is the correlation between reading and math. And that is the same whether you put reading gap first or math gap first, it's the same correlation. But then we drag this formula to the right, and now we have gender gap in math has a 1-to-1 correlation with itself. That's in cell C34. And going to the right, it has negative to virtually no correlations with the next two variables, has a slight positive correlation with share of unemployment. So similar to what we see in reading, but just a little bit different. And just to double check that we did everything correctly, we can go over here to I34 and confirm that we are indeed looking at the correlation between the gender gap in math and spending as a % of gross domestic product. So that appears to have worked. Okay. So now in step 6, we're going to use the numbers tool to format rows 33 and 34 so that everything is rounded to 2 decimal places to make it look nice. So we go to home, we highlight those 2 rows, the numbers in the rows. We go to home, we go to number, and if you want, you can just click, there we go. First you click this way, then you click this way, and now you've got everything rounded to 2 decimal points. You could also pull up the number formatting tab and specify the number of decimal places like this if you wanted to. But you can also just use these little decimal point adjustment buttons. Okay, so now everything's rounded to the nearest hundredths place. Okay, so next in step 7, we're going to create a scatter plot, and reading gap is going to be on the x-axis and math gap is going to be on the y-axis. So to do that, we need to select both arrays, the reading gap and the math gap. We're going to select the raw data for both. And then we're going to choose Insert Scatter from the Insert menu. So we go here. I'm gonna actually highlight the headers as well, the header row as well, but I'm not going to highlight the correlations at the bottom. I'm just going to highlight down to United States because the correlations are pre-calculated for us, and instead we want the graph to do that calculation. So we're going to go Insert, Chart, and we want a scatter plot. And we will go like this, just the basic scatter plot. Okay, let's scroll up to look at our graph. Oops. I'm going to drag this graph so that you can see it better. Okay, it looks kind of weird. So the next steps are going to be to format it. The first thing we want to do is move the horizontal axis to the bottom of the graph. And we do that by right-clicking the graph and choosing Format Axis. And then we're going to choose horizontal axis crosses at minimum, or we could type -30 as the place where it should cross, depending on the version of Excel that we have. So let me make this a little smaller. Let me drag this over here. Okay, so we're going to right-click, we're going to Format Axis, and we're going to do what did I just say? So horizontal axis crosses at minimum. Okay, so horizontal axis crosses, it doesn't give us at minimum here as an option. So I'm going to do, oops, I said not going to do anything. That's weird. Bounds are -30, that's right. What we want to do, okay, here we go. Horizontal axis crosses at -30. Because that's going to just move this horizontal axis down from 0 to -30. So to me, that's going to make the graph look more conventional. It's a matter of aesthetic preference, but I think it will be more conventional that way. Some people like to have the axis always at 0, but I think as people read the units on the axis and understand that 0 is up here, we should still be okay like this. Okay, so then we're going to go up to the design menu and choose Add Chart Element, and we're going to add a chart title that says Figure 1 Correlation Between Reading and Math Gaps. So we're going to put the title. Okay, so I'm copying that from the assignment sheet, and I'm just going to put that here in title because we already have a title up here. It's just not the right one. So I'm going to paste here, Figure 1 Correlation, or you could just type it in. Correlation between reading and math gap. I'm going to drag that so it's there we go. Just make the graph bigger, make it look a little bit nicer. Okay, then we're going to choose Add Chart Element, and we're going to add a linear trend line. So okay, Add Chart Element, we just click this little plus here, or we can go to Chart Design, Add Chart Element up here in the top left. And we're going to add trend line. So we're going to click X, and it just adds the trend line for us. Then we're going to right-click the trend line we just created and choose Format Trend Line. Then we're going to choose to display the equation of the line. And then we're also going to choose to display the R squared, or the square of the correlation coefficient. The R squared is like the amount of variance in X explained by Y. So Format Trend Line, and let's get this out of the way. I'm going to Format Trend Line. And we want display equation on chart, that's in the bottom right, and display R squared on chart. Good. Okay. Now I actually want to make everything bigger font wise. Everything looks a little small. Yeah, it doesn't specify to increase the fonts on the instructions, but these fonts look a little small to me. So I'm just going to click the whole, I'm going to highlight the whole graph by clicking on the top border. And I'm just going to click up here to my font increase button. Oops, that's not working. Oh, there it works this time. Okay, good. And I'm going to move this box so that it's not obscured by the dots. Good. Okay, so I have my finished graph, and I have my correlations calculated at bottom. I have my finished graph, which shows the correlation between reading scores on the bottom and math scores, or reading gender gaps on the bottom and math gender gaps on the right, on the vertical axis. Let me also label these axes. So we're going to do axis titles. Bottom will be gender gap in reading. And over here will be gender gap in math. Let me check it against the finished product to confirm that it looks similar. Oh, on the finished product, it says reading and math gap. But that is fine. But yeah, the line is the same. The R squared is the same, which is 0.5398. And the vertical axes are the same. The data points are the same. And the samples should have the equation as well, but it doesn't. So this one is actually more correct, the one that we just did. So we've just graphed a correlation, and that's an important skill to have for your final projects. You take your raw data points, you put one on the x-axis, one on the y-axis, you add a trend line to show the best fitting line for how y corresponds to x. You can show the equation of that line, which is this equation right here, y equals 0.65, x minus 32, and then the R squared shows the amount of variance in math gap explained by gender gap, which you'll learn next semester. But for now, it's good to know that that's just the correlation coefficient squared. So you've just graphed a correlation. Congratulations. If you have any questions, go back and rewatch the parts of the video that you're still unsure about. And I will see you in the next video. Thank you so much for watching.